Welcome, everybody. We are still waiting for a couple of people to join today's session. We will begin in just a couple more minutes. While you wait, please make sure you know where the questions panel is. You can use that to communicate directly with Catherine Bear during the webinar. If you've got any questions, or if you need somebody to follow up with you, or if you want a copy of the slides from today's session, you can actually ask her to get that for you. We don't have that as a part of the webinar today, but we can get that to you later on today if you are interested in getting that. All right, so again, thank you all for joining. We will get started in probably just a couple more minutes. I thank you for your patience at this point. Okay, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you all for being here today. I am Cecil King. I will be the presenter today. I'm one of the implementation specialists, project manager trainer for White Plume. So I've probably worked with a couple of you guys before. But today we will be reviewing the newest features within White Plume's version 5 product suite. This is the global periods and the date last seen specifically. If you've just joined us, please make sure you know where the chat window is, or where you can ask questions. Catherine Bear is sitting in Birmingham, and she will be paying attention to those and answering those as she can. And if you need any follow-up or anything like that after the call, let her know through that window. Okay? So why don't we just go ahead and get started for today. Go ahead. All right, so in today's session, we will review the 2 new features in White Plume. We'll go through the basics of the setup and how it works, and then we'll go through some of the displays and customizations that clients can use for their particular setup. This includes how and if you decide to display this information in your Excel capture form, how you can access it in Excel Smart, how to build rules against some of this information, if you have provider specialty, how to use that or use it to customize the display even further, how the information is actually updated in the system, so that you know when to expect to start seeing the information. And lastly, how you can actually import historical data into the application suite if you wish. All right. So let's start with what you need to have completed in order to start using the features, okay? You must be upgraded to version 5.1.12. During that setup, the archive option should activate immediately, but this must be on. Also, there is a SQL job that must be set up for this to process correctly. So for those clients using SQL Express, we do ask for you to get with White Plume support team and make sure that they verify that this SQL job is set up and running, okay? The last few things that I'm going to mention here are really more optional things that we do expect clients to be interested in leveraging within the system. So for example, like displaying information in the Excel capture form header. You may also wish to load historical information for your patients from within your practice management system or some other very reliable source. And you may also wish to write some custom rules against this information. These are three main areas that we do expect clients to, you know, maybe leverage our system for this new features. We will review some of these options for each of those during today's webinar, so that you kind of have an idea of, you know, what your options are, how to do that, and all that kind of stuff. So one thing I do want to mention before we dig in, we've already delivered all of the global periods per the AMA listings. This is within the White Plume setup, so you don't have to worry about defining each of those global dates. We will also kind of go over, if you wish to override what we've already got set up, I'll show you where you can actually do that, okay? There we go. All right. Okay, so there are a few ways that you can actually display this information in your forms header. So we're starting out with the Excel capture side of things. You don't have to actually have this display in your header in order to start compiling the global period or the date last seen information. Once you upgrade and you have all of the setup done, that will automatically start compiling. But we do expect that most clients using Excel capture will want to see this information in the header. Your forms representative will be able to assist you with this setup and how it displays, but we do want to go through some of the ideas of ways that you can actually display this in your forms header. Some of those are, you know, if you want them linked together, if you want them in separate fields, or if you want them on separate tabs within the header. And if you're using specialties, then you can actually display that with your date last seen. If you are not using specialties, then you may decide that it would be helpful for filtering out what displays for your providers. We'll review how those set up in White Plume later. But for now, let's look at some of those examples of Excel capture. To me, a visual is much easier than me just telling you what that looks like. So this first option that I want to show you shows, and let me point this out, we've got the global period information here, historical diagnosis information here. This is just some demo information to give you an idea of what, you know, at least one option looks like. Let's go through this global period a little bit more specifically. We've got the CPT code, the description, and then the end date for that global period. Next to that, we actually have the date the patient was last seen. So you can see all of that together in one section, all right? Below that, the historical diagnosis, it looks very similar to the two different labels here, all right? So these are separate fields, right? All right, the second one here kind of puts these two together. So you've got your historical diagnosis tab and then your global period tab. So the user can click in between those two tabs to display what they need to be looking at, right? It kind of puts those down into one area so that you're taking up just a little bit less room in the forms header. You know, you don't want to take up so much room in the forms header that it ends up covering up some of the CPTs or diagnosis information in the tabs below. So you want to be cognizant of that information. So here, one other thing that I'll point out is that we've got the same information that we had here. One extra piece that we've got here in this bold section is the provider specialty. So if you have specialties set up, then you would actually see the specialty that displays next to that patient last seen information. Okay. Last option that I want to show you, this is let's preserve as much of that header as we possibly can and put all of these together, right? We've got the last seen information, so technically this section in this tab. You've got the global, that would display on this tab. So as you toggle through each one, you see each piece, and then the historical diagnosis tab is here. All right, so you've kind of got some options there, and each client can kind of just, everybody's going to have a different perspective on what works best, right? So you've got the ability to work with your forms representative and say, hey, I want all of these separated out. I want to see the provider specialty. I don't want to see the provider specialty. You've got some of that customization potential within how this displays in Excel Capture. Okay. All right, let's move on. Okay. In Excel Smart, a new icon displays, and this displays by default. You'll notice that up here in our screenshot. It only displays the historical information once you start processing the charges. So once you start sending charges out of Excel Smart, that's when you would actually be able to see that information populate on the next encounter for that patient. So when you actually click on this icon, what displays is the global period information for that patient below. The specialty displays next to that patient. If there is no specialty defined for that provider, then it will display as a NA. All right. All right, let's move on. Let's look at some rules. So even further, within Excel Smart rules validation, you can also build rules to flag the user if they need to review an encounter based on these new rules attributes. It's the last seen date, the specialty for last seen, global period code, the global period description, global period end date, and global period specialties. A lot of attributes that you could potentially use to customize the rules for you. I do want to go over a couple of ideas here that you may be interested in terms of building a rule. You might be looking at that going, okay, how do I need to actually use that? So let's give you two standard examples of how you can actually build a rule against this. The first one I'm going to go with is this one back here, okay? It's looking for the end date of the global to be in the future. So when global period end date is greater than procedure from date of service. So it's looking for it to be in the future. And it's looking for that post-op code to be missing. So this will stop the user to either review notes or look deeper or do whatever they need to do in order to decide if that post-op actually needs to be added to this particular encounter. Okay. The second rule, the one down below here, kind of to the left bottom, is looking for the E&M to flag the user when a new patient visit is used for a patient when the last date that the patient was seen was in the last 3 years. So when it starts with that 9920, which is a new patient E&M, and it's looking for that date last seen to be sometime within the last 3 years. So you've got the ability to customize that or stop the user and say, hey, last seen date was within the last 3 years. You need to be using an existing patient code. Now, this is one area that if you are using provider specialty, this might actually come in handy. If you want to set up the providers to have the specialty, or if you already have that done, then you can even build the rule to further specify that specialty as another parameter, okay? But remember, you will still be able to see that specialty or when that CPT was used within that procedure icon within Excel Smart as well. So you can kind of toggle between those two, okay? What I want to show you here next is how this looks in Excel Smart. This is both of those two rules that we just had on the other screen. It displays just like your rules display today. It'll look just the same. You've got the ability to customize that kind of to your need. One thing that I will point out here is that on this new patient code, you can actually build remedy codes within the rule to say, you know what, you used a new patient code, but here's a listing of those existing patient codes that could be used as well, or should be used instead, okay? Alrighty. Now let's go over some of the basics of how to set up the provider specialty. If you already have this set up in ePass support maintenance, then you know that data is collected on a going forward basis. So in other words, if this is new for you, this is attached to the charges after it's processed through the White Plume suite. So it won't retroactively go back. It'll go, you know, on a today forward, or when you set up the specialty going forward, okay? If you need to verify if you've got provider specialty set up, it's very easy to specify or look at if that's already set up. So in ePass support maintenance, you notice up here, if you go to your provider's icon, and then you've got a column that displays by default for the specialty. If nothing displays, then that means that provider does not have a specialty associated with them. If something does display, then it means that that's the specialty that provider is associated with. So further than that, where you actually set up or define that specialty is within the provider entry itself. So each provider entry can be associated to one specialty. So if you double click on it, you can actually open up Rachel Chen. You can define her specialty here, and it's associated with both codes. Further, this specialty, it's free text. You can put in here whatever you want to put in here. Once you add a specialty here, it will be a part of the drop down, so that if you need to associate multiple providers with that specific specialty, you've got the ability to do that. Okay. One thing that I want to go ahead and mention here is that if you are not using specialties today and you are interested in starting to use it or setting that up in your system, it might be worth it to go ahead and contact the team and discuss any other nuances that might be pertinent to your setup, other ways that further impacts the way that your system is set up. All right. There are a couple of nuances that go with that, and it might be worth knowing some of that information. All right. Now, as I mentioned earlier, White Plume delivers the global periods per the AMA guidelines. You may actually wish to use a different global period than the one specified by AMA, or you may wish to add other CBTs to those global dates. You can actually do that within the system. This is actually done within ePass configuration. Let me get that screenshot up for you guys. This is just overriding the global dates provided by AMA. So to add an override, you would go to ePass configuration. You would open up code configuration, and then go to your procedures information tab. Over to the right hand, this is where you can add an override for a CPT code. And down here, you can see where you can override the global date. All right. Once you add any overrides, you can actually see that information display in your listing of all of the CPT codes listed within ePass configuration. Okay. One other thing that I want to add here, if you need a listing of those AMA dates, we can provide that separately if you wish. Just let us know if you need a copy of that information. Okay. All right, so let's dig into how and when information is data. When is this data actually updated? When does it start compiling? When can you see this in White Plume? So once an encounter is completed in Excella Smart, it starts compiling that information, okay? The system does require that overnight SQL job to run in order for you to see the information in the system. That's why that SQL job is important for you to double check and make sure that that is running and set up. But it does, once it is set up, it does run automatically. But I want to make sure that you guys know this doesn't display that information immediately in White Plume. It does take that overnight job after the charge is completed from Excella Smart for it to be fully updated within White Plume. Okay. If you decide that you want to actually import historical information from your PM system or some other reliable source into White Plume, you can actually do that. Some clients might be listening to this and saying, you know what, I've got all of this historical CPT information from the last 3 years, and I want to upload that into the system so that I've got the date last seen available. You absolutely can do that with a spreadsheet, and you can actually import that into EPAS support maintenance as well. We do have a document in the works that does review each of those steps. So if you're interested in doing that, let your CAE or the support team know, and they can pass that along to you. But again, keep in mind, even after you import that information, that job will have to run overnight so that it can fully update the system. Okay. And really and truly, this actually concludes the global period and data testing portion of the webinar. But I do want to mention one last thing to you guys. I want to take this time to review one feature that I know many clients have been interested in for a long time. And this is the hard stop for critical rules in Excella Smart. I mostly just want to make sure that you know that this is available and basically how this works. So if you've been around for a while, you probably know that within the validation manager, you can specify a severity of a rule, be that informational, warning, or critical. You can see those right over here in my screenshot. But today, you know, before 5.1.12, this was really just a visual icon next to the rule. Now you can actually set up the system to prevent users from completing encounters if a critical rule is still in the batch. So if you're configured for this, then the user will receive an error saying that they can't complete the batch until the rule is addressed. That's what this actual error is saying. So this really makes sure that the user addresses all of those critical rules before they actually complete these charges. So further, if you do need to allow an override, a manager can use their credentials to override the rule. That's what we're actually seeing right here, is the ability to override that critical rule. All right, there are a couple of options with that. Think of it like a self-checkout at the grocery store, if any of you guys use that. If something goes wrong and you do something wrong and somebody has to come over, scan something, log in, override the issue, and let you continue. It's very similar here. The manager will have to log in and decide how they want this to be handled. Do they want to override it for this one encounter validation? Do they want to do it for the entire batch that this user is using? Or do you want them to be able to override this the whole time they're logged into the application, at least at this point? All right, you've got the ability to do that and override it when you need to. One thing that I do want to mention, we obviously don't want you to be overriding all the time. This is supposed to be kind of a fallback. If you do need to override something, then you can. It's not going to prevent you from getting your stuff done, full stop. So we do want you to be deliberate about which critical rules you're actually using. Can you actually get rid of them? Can they go away? Can the user do what they need to do in order to make that critical rule go away? So keep that in mind before you actually turn this on. And then let your CAE know, and we'll follow up with you if you're interested in kind of going forward with this as well. Okay. I think that that's all that I've got for today. What I'm going to do, Catherine, I know that you've probably had some questions that have come up. Is there anything that we need to go over that's pertinent to the group? And while she answers, I'm just going to throw this out there for the attendees here. If there's anything that you want us to follow up with you on, please use that chat panel and make sure that Catherine has a copy of that and knows, what she needs to follow up with you guys on, or get your CAE or the White Plume team to follow up with you on.
Cecil, we had a continuing question by several folks that was in regards
Sure.
to, can you set the global dates by insurance company? So I was hoping you could address that just because it was a continuing question from several folks.
I don't believe that that's it's for that particular CPT code at this point. Now, one thing that, I mean, I think if we need to dig into that further with each client, that would be something that we could do offline. But the way that it is today, it's for that particular CPT code.
Okay, perfect. Several people had questions in regards to specific time frames and days, et cetera. So I think those will probably be best answered with our support staff.
Well, and maybe even an individual basis, but yeah.
So
were there any other?
Plans.
Okay, all righty. Do you want me to leave the chat panel open a little bit longer? I don't know if anybody else, if you can tell if somebody's typing something or needs to get something else in before we wrap this up.
I will leave yes, why don't we leave the questions open just for a moment. I'm getting some answers back too that you can set, let's see, you can set information by BE and generic code for insurances, et cetera. So there are some ways we can think out. So I think doing this individually is probably going to be a great answer to the